Hello. For this study, I have looked at privatization of public schools and issues with high-stakes standardized testing. And I think that the topic of privatization of public schools has a particular relevance. It attempts to fill a gap that remains in the knowledge base regarding the efficiency and stability of the education system in the United States. And also, the United States as a country is competing on a global scale with other countries in terms of education and test scores, and it's interesting to study this topic. And I have looked at sources that are in opposition of privatization. So in this study there's a limitation that I don't have any supporting side of privatization examined, and this study is also limited in scope because there is work of 8 authors mentioned. And for this study I have used content analysis. Now I'm going to talk about the literature that I have looked at for this study and the information mentioned there. To start off, traditional schools may no longer be maintainable if school districts lose economic resources and significant moral authority to charter schools. Charters pose competition for traditional schools. The more charter schools get, the less do public schools, and the idea that private schools could deliver education that would have equal quality to current education at half the price has not been realized in practice. Value added in US private schools is only slightly higher than that in public schools, looking from the most optimistic view. As Diane Ravitch in her book states, the private schools are no better than public schools based on results, because on average the scores are no different if charter schools and public schools enroll the same kinds of students, nor have charter schools produced cost savings. Other countries whose students have regularly outperformed US students all have education systems that are monopolies, that are centrally coordinated or directed by national governments. Not a single one of those countries uses competition, vouchers, and private management as a tool for improving education. A few of those OECD countries, such as Finland, France, and Germany, fund private or religious schools. However, it's important to notice that they require that private and religious schools operate in accordance with the same standards as public schools. They must use the same curriculum and tests and get about the same funding and pay the same teacher salaries as do public schools. Corporate reformers have 3 main goals that they try to accomplish. First, profit from privatizing education by replacing publicly funded public schools with privately managed charter schools that would be publicly funded. Furthermore, teaching profession is being marginalized by replacing teachers with corporate experts that control curriculum development and privatize teacher that privatize teacher and student assessment via standardized tests. Second, show public teachers and schools as failing by using standardized test scores and blaming teachers as the main cause for the high degree of childhood poverty and economic inequality in the US. Third, show public school teachers and their unions as failing so as to destroy unions and eliminate teacher tenure. If charters keep expanding aggressively in districts across nation, there is a risk that a dual school system will be created. A dual school system is inherently discriminatory, particularly when one of the sectors is privately run and deregulated, free to write its own rules and reject unwanted students, and the other must take all students and follow all state regulations and laws, no matter how costly. Currently, the most successful charters spend substantially more than the public schools, while public schools enroll students most expensive to educate. Such system, when evolved more fully, would turn public schools into schools of last choice rather than institutions that serve and reflect their communities. Students from higher income and better educated families are more likely to exit public schools for placement at schools attended by higher scoring students, and this leads to an increased social class and test score polarization among schools without a corresponding improvement in the quality of education. Also, my research suggests that privatization of public schooling weakens democracy and is likely to increase the rigidity of social stratification. And talking about high-stakes standardized testing, high-stakes tests are stated to be as vehicles for compensating for social and educational inequalities by no child left behind. Reforms of such nature are intended for teacher and student motivation to prepare better for tests, which would result in increased achievement as measured by test scores. This way, the testing reforms are in some way making up for consistently poor resources, curriculum, and instruction received by low-income students and students of color. In students of color case, the high-stakes testing reforms would help in closing the achievement gap. However, the gaps may be getting larger and students may not be learning more under the reforms of high-stakes testing. Some teachers and students have constricted curricula, which does not in an adequate way account for student diversity and high-pressure situations and prevent the educational progress of students. Standardized tests to be seen as valid and reliable measures of human populations require that some students fail. Such tests have been advocated for in order to reach racial and economic equality by closing the test score achievement gap. However, closing the achievement gap does not mean having everyone succeed in the tests. It really means that the same numbers of rich and poor children pass and fail, that equal numbers of white and African American children pass and fail, same with English speakers and English language learners, etc. Also, standardized tests do not account for cognitive transfer skills and knowledge across subjects, and also there is lack of objectivity and accuracy of the scoring of the tests themselves. Standardized tests do not measure skills like the ability to listen and communicate, as well as attitudes such as taking responsibility and punctuality are not measured by standardized tests. Private schools should work together with public schools, not compete. From functionalist perspective, society is a complex system whose parts are interrelated and work together in order to promote solidarity and stability. Conflict theory perspective states that there is an issue of power going on. Money is being unevenly distributed among institutions. Charters receive much money and spend more, while public schools are poorer and spend much money on hard to educate students, while private schools often pick students and tend to educate those of the more affluent. Meanwhile, public schools are the places for the poor. This causes conflict. There is inequality in how students are distributed among institutions, and money is involved as a form of power. Talking about standardized testing, structural functionalists would argue that in order to move toward an equilibrium in standardized testing system, there should be a balance in form of expanding the curriculum, and also there should be more focus added to the non-cognitive skill development. In such a way, the structure would shape students to become more well-rounded citizens. From conflict theory perspective, power is being unevenly distributed between groups in society, which reflects itself in such a manner that standardized tests are found to be highly correlated with family income. Socioeconomic status is in play here, and children whose families have the highest income are overrepresented at the top, while those with the lowest income at the bottom. The scores of standardized tests are likely to continue further distinctions and conflict between the classes in terms of what jobs in the future might be available, coming off of the test scores as an influential factor. And as I mentioned, for the study, I have used content analysis as a form of performing this research, and content analysis is a powerful data reduction technique, and due to the fact that it can be applied to examine any piece of writing or occurrence of recorded communications, content analysis is used in large number of fields, including sociology. And its major benefit comes from the fact that it is a systematic, replicable technique for compressing many words of text into fewer content categories. And there's several advantages and disadvantages to content analysis, and I can mention a few. Advantages of it include the fact that it looks directly at communication via text or transcripts, and hence gets at the central aspect of social interaction. It can also it allow for both quantitative and qualitative operations. Its disadvantages: it can be extremely time consuming, and is often also devoid of theoretical base or attempts too liberally to draw meaningful inferences about the relationships and impacts implied in a study. to conduct a content analysis on a text. The text is coded, broken down into manageable categories on a variety of levels, word, sense, phrase, sentence, or theme, and then examined. So yes, I have enjoyed doing this study, and thank you very much, Dr. Rice, for taking time and helping me with finishing up this course, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.